28 missiles hit Ukraine on Wednesday night. Ukraine's air defenses intercepted none of them. All 28 got through. At least 7 people died. That is not the story that led the wires this week. The story that led every wire was Hormuz. Iran and Oman closing in on an understanding to reopen the strait. Markets rallied on it, and I want to be clear that is real and it matters, but it's not the decision-grade fact of this week. The decision-grade fact is what happened 48 hours after that missile barrage, when the President of the United States turned down Ukraine's request for more Patriot interceptors. Not for lack of will, for lack of stock. Washington said in public that its interceptor inventory is stretched thin by the Middle East. That's the story. Not that a strait might reopen. That the country backstopping security guarantees on 2 fronts just told one of them it's out of the specific hardware that would have stopped Wednesday's barrage. I'm Joseph Suarez, and this is Corridor Intelligence Dispatch. If you read the briefs this week, you saw the pieces. Let me put them together. Iran and Oman reached an understanding on shipping coordinates through the Strait of Hormuz. A joint statement is reportedly in final drafting. Trump says an announcement could land any day. Markets built a rally around that optimism, and then a chip sector sell-off wiped most of it out anyway. The Kospi fell 4.6% in a single session. Away from the strait, 3 other fronts moved the opposite direction. In Lebanon, 2 Israeli army reservists were killed by an IED in a booby-trapped building near the village of Mazdal Zaun. First Israeli combat death since June's truce with Hezbollah. Israel responded with its heaviest bombardment of Lebanon since the ceasefire took hold. In the Red Sea, the Houthis hit their 8th Saudi tanker since declaring a blockade on July 22nd. 29 vessels forced to turn back so far, a second choke point, running in parallel to Hormuz, that nobody is anywhere close to closing a deal on. And in Ukraine, as I said, the interceptor refusal 2 days after that barrage went entirely unintercepted. Layer in Washington and Ottawa. A new 50% tariff on a broad range of Canadian goods takes effect August 9th. That's arriving in the same stretch where Washington has refunded roughly $100 billion in tariffs nationwide after the Supreme Court found the underlying emergency powers levies unauthorized. CUSMA-compliant goods, still close to 90% of Canadian exports, remain the exemption that actually governs landed cost. And in the boardrooms, the AI trade kept sorting winners from spenders. Palantir posted 93% revenue growth. AstraZeneca and Bristol Myers Squibb are cycling a roughly $400 billion pharma mega deal. The geopolitical premium sat quietly underneath all of it, waiting to reprice. Here's the read the market is running with. Hormuz is the choke point that matters, because it's the one with a price attached. Oil, shipping insurance, freight rates. Diplomats get the credit when it closes. But a choke point isn't just a strait. A choke point is any point where a scarce, non-substitutable resource has to pass through a narrow gate. And this week, Washington told the entire world, in the plainest language a superpower uses, that its own Patriot interceptor stockpile is exactly that kind of choke point now. Not unlimited, not automatic. Rationed. Explicitly. Between 2 theaters. With the Gulf currently winning the allocation. That reframes everything else. A Hormuz deal, if it holds, takes tail risk out of energy markets. Fine. It does nothing for Lebanon, where a 7-week truce absorbed its first Israeli combat deaths. It does nothing for the Red Sea, where the Houthis are escalating precisely because Saudi Arabia is routing tankers around their blockade. And it does nothing for Ukraine, where the interceptor shortfall is now a matter of public record, not a battlefield interference. 3 fronts, 1 shared. Finite input. If you exhale when Hormuz reopens, you've priced the wrong risk, because the constraint that actually governs all 3 theaters didn't get more available this week. It got more visibly scarce and more explicitly rationed by a political choice about which conflict is the current priority. 3 groups need to hear this differently. For capital, stop treating de-escalation as systemic. A Hormuz deal lowers the energy war premium. It does not lower the security premium on Lebanon, the Red Sea, or Eastern Europe, because those risks now share one constrained input instead of running on independent diplomatic tracks. Price each choke point separately. Price the interceptor constraint as the one that binds. For operators, if your people, your supply chain, or your capital touches the Gulf, the Levant, the Baltic to Black Sea corridor, or Red Sea shipping lanes, change the operating assumption. American hardware backstops no longer arrive on demand. Build the plan assuming rationed support, not guaranteed support, and revisit it every time Washington signals a new allocation choice. And for Canada, the tariff track is teaching the exact same discipline. A 50% tariff round lands the same stretch Washington processes $100 billion in refunds elsewhere. That's not incoherence. That's a preview of how this administration renegotiates trade. Tariff by tariff, not through one grand settlement. CUSMA compliant status, not the headline rate, is still what sets your landed cost. We've watched governments negotiate under exactly this kind of pressure before. I served in Canada's Prime Minister's office during the 2008 financial crisis and as Chief of Staff in the Senate during the 2020 pandemic. Our team reads Washington tariffs by tariff approach the same way we read its interceptor allocation, as a preference for keeping leverage granular and reversible, rather than locking it into one grand bargain. The operators and governments who treat every exemption, every refund, every allocation decision as provisional, not as a settled floor, are the ones positioned to move when the next reallocation happens. 3 things to do this week. Separate your risk book by choke point. Think Hormuz, el-Mandeb, Lebanon, Ukraine. Each one needs its own probability estimate, not a single regional discount. Stop assuming American air defense or diplomatic bandwidth shows up on demand. Anywhere you're exposed. And file every Canadian exemption or refund as conditional. Revisit it monthly. Never bank it as permanent. 4 things to watch. Whether Tehran confirms the Hormuz understanding through its own official channels. An Iranian denial has broken this exact narrative twice already this summer. Whether the Lebanon truce holds past Israel's retaliatory strikes. Whether the Houthis escalate further now that the world's attention has moved to Hormuz. And Friday's U.S. jobs report, which decides the Fed's September path and how much capital is even available to reprice any of this. The Hormuz deal, when it's announced, will be the headline every wire runs with. The interceptor arithmetic is what will still be governing outcomes in November. Build for the one that doesn't make the front page. If you want this depth every week, the read behind the headlines, before the rest of the market catches up, subscribe to the Corridor Intelligence Dispatch. And if you're making decisions right now on geopolitical exposure, energy pricing, or supply chain resilience, my advisory practice is open. Link is below. I'm Joseph Suarez. I'll see you next week.